as you can see, this is After Effects. I've got the 3 pieces of footage that I gave you last week. One was aquatic, one was a car park, and one was the gates. Now, I did mention in the mission that some of these pieces of footage are actually easier to track than others, and there is reasons for that. If we just have a quick look at the footage, there's our first piece of footage. This is outside, obviously, the aquatic centre. This footage was captured on my Samsung using a camera gimbal, so it is smooth footage. I created 3 clips. One was from the aquatic centre, which you can see there. The next one was the car park at the back of the stadium, there. And the last one was another clip, if I can get it working, near the gates at the back of the stadium as well. So I took this footage while out exercising, so it was worth having a go. Each of the pieces of footage specifically picked for a particular reason. When you're doing 3D tracking, it's important to try and have some environmental kind of objects that you can actually track to. You'll notice the ground on here specifically I picked so that it makes it an easy track. There's lots of detail in the ground with all these little bricks that allow the software to pick up particular points and allow it to create these tracking points, which you can then attach objects to. If you look at the other one, the car park, this one, in the middle there's not a lot of detail. You've got detail in the parking bays. We've got detail in the fences and some of the other detail around there. So when you walk around, you can see there. Chances the automatic tracking won't find any kind of solutions for any of this area here because it's the detail's quite small. With this one, we've got some detail that will be able to be tracked, like the buildings and things. We're going to use the first clip because it's an easy track to do, and if you've never done any 3D tracking on After Effects before, it makes it a lot easier to actually understand it. And this is why I picked this one out, having been around there before. So we're going to drag the first clip into the timeline. So we've got that. One thing to remember as well, I know in class we've had this problem before. Sometimes you might forget that up here we've got tabs. You'll notice the footage there, aquatic tiles 1, and we've got the composition. Sometimes I've noticed students have got a bit mixed up at the top here. You'll notice if you double click on any kind of clip, it'll open it up here as a separate tab. So you won't be able to see any of the other composition layers. So just to remember, when you're using After Effects and you double click on some clip and you can't see any effects in the window, chances you've possibly got it into the individual layer. It's a bit like using Premiere where you've got the clip window and you've got the composition window side by side. But in After Effects, the 2 windows are at the top here. With After Effects and Premiere itself, it uses something called workspaces. Workspaces are kind of default settings for using, say for example, you're using effects, you can have it on the effects and priorities on the kind of the effects and presets down the side here. If we click on motion tracking, the priorities on motion tracking, we'll keep everybody, if we keep everybody on default, then we should have something that looks the same. So as I said, I've dragged the aquatic tiles into the timeline, so we've got the whole of the video clip down here. Now one thing to remember is that these green dots here are rendered footage. If I just slide along here, you'll notice it's rendering the footage. Any kind of changes, any kind of additional effects, we'll reset that, and you'll have to, if you play through, it'll render it. So chances, if you play through with the spacebar, it will play through, but it might play slow. Once everything's green, when you play it back again, it should play somewhere around full speed. We're going to create a solve. So the solve basically is it's going to analyze the footage, It's going to work it all out, and then it's going to add some markers related to some common areas of the footage itself. So you'll see them appear. So one of two ways of doing this. You can go to the effects, and you can go to perspective and 3D camera tracker, or you can go to this tracking down here and you say track camera, and away we go. It's going to work out all these tracking points now. I'm just going to leave it. Okay, now see that we've got our fixed field of view, fixed angle of view. We've got that. Now we're going to create a camera. Click. As soon as we create this camera, we notice all of these tracking points on here. If I scroll through, you'll see a lot of points that will appear and disappear. It means it can't track them. So we're looking to solve or to attach the text to something that stays with the camera throughout, as much as possible anyway. You'll notice some of these further off tracks here, these further off points here, are fairly standard. The foreground ones tend to appear and disappear as I'm scrolling through. Next up, if you move your mouse into the area here, you can see, and it looks fairly good track, because when you move your pointer across, you can see it's a little target, and you can see the points, and because of the parallax of the camera, you'll notice that it is managing to track maybe 3-4 points. Well, 3 points, yeah, about 3 points around there, and that circle is staying flat. You go somewhere over here, it has no idea what it's doing. It's not too sure. It's tracked some of the aquatic center sign over here, but it doesn't really know, so ignore all those. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create a null. Now, we've done nulls before, where we attach a null to something and then we attach things to the null. So it could be objects, it could be effects, it could be things like that. So I'm going to pick something maybe around there. So if you move your mouse around, you can track that. You can also as well highlight points as well, but in some cases makes it a lot easier now, where you can just click on that. So I'm going to right click, so pick somewhere in the middle, right click, create null. Okay, you'll notice now that the null has appeared there. Now if I play through, you'll see that null stays there. So that's now a kind of fixed point attached to the tracking markers on the 3D camera. Next up, we're going to add some text, and we use the horizontal type tool up here on the menu. I'm just going to click on that, and then we click in the window somewhere here, and we'll say HELLO. I picked a particular font which is quite strong and stands out, so we've got that. Now, we've put the text in there, but at the moment the camera is 3D, but the text is 2D, so it's not going to do anything. We're just going to have the text as if it was foreground text. So we need to create and make sure that this text is on a 3D layer. And we do this by selecting this here, and you'll notice up here 3D layer. You'll notice the track null is also 3D, but we need to put the text into a 3D layer. We do that by clicking on that. It is now in a 3D layer. It's also disappeared somewhere. Oh, there it is. Yeah, so it's appeared somewhere over here. So just check through, make sure you know where your text has disappeared to. You'll notice at the moment it's not linked to anything. I may as well mention this as well. If you remember last time when we've done the Doctor Strange, you can actually toggle switch into modes to go between that and maybe things like normal, screen, when we got transparencies and other things like that. We want to attach our text to the null, and we're going to attach it, and you go attach that to the null there. So now it's actually attached to the null. So it is moving around, but relative to the null, it's way out. Okay, we know the null is somewhere, and if I click on the null there, you'll see the point off in the distance. We click on the text, you'll notice the text is here. It's also relative to the null, it's a lot far off. You might just be able to see the null over here and the text here. One thing to note, and I'm going to bring this up, so if you expand the text and expand transform, there's a few things you'll actually see here. Now, each object that you put into After Effects, whether it's 3D, 2D, has an origin point. It's a bit like Maya origins. So your cube has a origin in the middle, sphere in the middle, so on. So you'll notice some numbers. If you expand this transform on your text, you'll see the anchor point 0, 0, 0. Now I want the text to be in the middle. So where that L is, somewhere at the bottom, I want the anchor point to be in the middle of that. So if I'm rotating it, it'll rotate around the central point instead of at the end. At the moment it's like a gate. If you rotate that text, it will rotate around kind of that edge. I'll try it now. If I get it the right way, you'll notice, yeah, 0. I'll set that to 0. We'll see if we can, there. So it's effectively like a gate. It's rotating around that point. I don't want it to rotate around that point. I want to rotate around the middle. Okay, so we can move the anchor point. So if I shift the anchor point somewhere like this, you'll notice the anchor point shifting. So I'm going to move it to somewhere about the L. Oops. And then I'm going to move it down so it's somewhere there. We can actually zoom in a bit using the middle mouse button, just so I can get that at the bottom. So somewhere in the middle of the L at the bottom. Now if I was to do a rotation around there, you'll notice rotating around the center. Okay, so because I want the text to be on the ground, the bottom anchor should match the position of the null. Okay, now it's far off. We know that at the moment because if you look at the position, minus 4,000, 15,000, 19, what was it, 1,903, way out. Okay, now we've attached it to the null. Now if I set these 0, 0, 0, you will now notice that that position was relative to the null. Okay, so now the text is actually attached to the null because the anchor point is on the bottom. The anchor point is at the same position as the null. So we move the position to 0. We've shifted the anchor point. Now, if I zoom out a bit, we play this. It's jumping all over the place, but if I was to render that, you'll notice that the text is actually attached, now attached. If I press play, you'll notice the text is rendering, it's running slowly, but the text is now attached to the null. Next up, I think we're just going to scale it up, make it look bigger. Rewind it a bit. Scale it up again. Try and make it look like it's in the scene. The angle's a bit off, so you might want to tweak the angle relative to the object itself. So try and make it look as if it's part of the scene. If you can, there we go. Okay. Now I hit spacebar. We've now got our text that looks like it's sitting in the middle of the bricks. And even when the camera moves off, we know the position in 3D space of that null is still there. Now there's something else in addition. There's a reason for that. I put these, I included those bollards in there. If you put the text too big, this text will run behind one of those bollards. or both bollards, depending on the size of your text. On top of that, you could add things like shadows. You could make a copy of that layer, rotate it relative to the text. There's other things you can do. As I said, if you made that text bigger, it might actually go behind the bollards. So what you'd have to then do is create a 2D mask, which we've done before, and mask out part of the text so that it appears behind the bollards. Okay. So in addition to that, if anyone wants to try it, add some shadows. If your text is too big, add a 2D mask and make it look like the text is actually behind the bollards. Last thing to do is to export the footage. Now we do this because we've used Premiere before. We moved from Premiere to After Effects and we've edited everything in Premiere. In this case, what we're going to do, we're keeping in After Effects, and the way we export it, we use the media encoder. Now you should, if you've installed After Effects and Premiere Photoshop, have the media encoder, and you'll notice here it says add to media encoder queue. So we click on that. This will open up media encoder for you in the foreground. We're actually sitting in media encoder. I'll maximize that. You'll see our footage. It's the default name of the composition, which whatever you set up to start with. H.264, make sure it's a H.264 for compression. High bit rate match source. Now this is the important bit. Always done this before. Make sure you know where you're saving it. It's saving in the same folder as the composition itself. So I'm just going to save it there. Just make sure, click on that, make sure you know where it's going to save. Online demo in. So it's going to save that. I'm going to call it something live. I'm going to call it live demo. So we know what it's called. Click save. It's calling it there, live demo, and we click on play. So it's nearly done, and there it is. Right, I'm just going to switch, and we're going to look at the final footage. I've opened it up in VLC player, and you see the footage there. I've opened it from the source where I saved it. Make sure you know where you've saved it, and I'll just play, and there it is. It's a very, very simple way of adding text to a point. So in this session, we've learnt really how to create a camera solve using the footage that we've been given. We've created a null. We've created the text. We've attached the text to the null, and we've also moved the relative position of the text to the null itself. So it's actually attached to the null and not just somewhere else relative to the null. It's very important about that point where we know where the position is of an object, whether it's a 2D object or 3D object, relative to the null that we create. I hope that was fine, and I'll see you again soon. Thank you. Bye.